Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode of GUcast. This is Declan Murphy, urologist here at Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre in Melbourne. Joined as ever by my co-host, Dr. Renu Eapen, urologist here at Peter Mac as well. Hello, Renu.
Good morning, Declan. Bit of a somber mood in the studio today, I think, as we discuss a very topical and important issue.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the ongoing lockdown and the misery.
That too. It's all fitting with the mood.
Is there anything to look forward to? Surely, we'll pick something.
We could talk about Nathan's haircut.
We could talk about Nathan's haircut. So also with us in studio today is our colleague Nathan Lawrentschuk, consultant urologist here at Peter Mac in Melbourne and director of urology at the Royal Melbourne across the street. Hello, Nathan, a friend of the podcast. Thanks for coming back in.
Morning, Nathan.
Good morning. Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah,
the kids did a great job, by the way.
Well, with barbershops closed, we have to become, I suppose, a little bit of a mother of invention, don't we?
Yeah, so what's the routine in the Lawrentschuk house? You've bought yourself a set of clippers, is that right?
We've had several over the lockdowns, but my kids have been begging me to do it. And, of course, being Father's Day yesterday, I couldn't resist and they jumped in. So here we are.
Do you cut their hair too, Nathan?
No, they wouldn't let me near them.
Really?
Fortunately, yeah.
Oh, the teenage boys. Well, we've been doing the same since March last year. Home haircuts with Daddy, you know, the three of us taking turns shearing away. And when lockdown lifted, they refused to go back to the hairdressers. They said, we like it at home, you know. So I suspect as the boys get a little bit older, they'll get a lot more conscious about the damage, the reputational damage.
I suspect so.
Fantastic. So welcome back. Great to have Nathan back in. And yeah, well, look, we've decided to revisit a topic that we covered a couple of months ago.
We were very upbeat about it a couple of months ago, weren't we? It was a fantastic time when yourself included, Jeremy Teo and colleagues released a fantastic article about the prevalence of Manels and underrepresentation of women in conferences.
Yeah, it did feel like a really good time, didn't it? Big publication, European Urology, systematic review led by Jeremy, really uncovering in academic urology, especially around conferences, the lack of diversity, gender diversity in conferences, and really, it was a lovely paper. We had Maria Ribal and Stacey Loeb, Jeremy Teo, myself, and yourself had a really good podcast.
Yeah,
we'll put a link in the show notes, and really, I thought very much some really, really positive reaction on social media. Now, social media is a strange place, isn't it? That seemed to, by and large, apart from a couple of things we spoke about at the time, really support this and the attention it was drawing to it. And in fact, there were a couple of spin-off publications that we'll talk about today that came in the journal, again, reinforcing some positive steps forward, I think, for gender diversity in urology. However, there was this letter that was written to the editor, a letter to the editor by an esteemed senior urologist, which has definitely provoked a lot of reaction, the usual Twitter storm and all that going around it, and has certainly brought the whole issue bubbling back up to the fore and really some quite diverse views we're seeing, but overall quite a bit of upset, I think, would be one way of summarising, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, I definitely think it triggered a lot of emotions. Yeah. This time around, and brought the discussion back into light, but it sort of took a bit of a negative twist, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And look, so what we decided to do today was revisit the issue. We don't want to dissect the letter. It's out there for people to have a look at. But what we did want to do is revisit, I suppose, the steps forward, Nathan. Isn't that what we sort of decided? And so we've invited two great guests on the podcast to have a chat about this today. One of them is one of your old mentors from your time in Toronto on fellowship. Isn't that right? Yeah.
Of course, it's wonderful to be joined by Professor Neil Fleshner, the chairman of the Department of Urology at the University of Toronto. He's been a long stalwart and promoter of a lot of aspects of urology and also very much being across many of the current issues of urology. And Neil's always been available for comment on all these sort of things. So it's a pleasure to have Neil with us today.
Yeah, welcome, Neil. Thank you for joining us.
Great to see you, Neil.
Thank you very much to all of you. Good morning to you. Of course, it's late afternoon for us here in the East Coast of North America.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us on a Sunday evening. It's a civilized Monday morning here in total lockdown. We won't go on about the lockdown thing, will we? And we've invited Neil on because he has taken a position on this. The letter was written by one of his senior colleagues at his department, and they've come out with a sort of a formal response, which we'll get to shortly. And we also want to welcome, for the first time on the podcast as well, Dr. Sarah Psutka. from the University of Washington, Seattle, an associate professor at the University of Washington, and an associate editor of European Urology. Sarah, welcome to GUcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And good morning to you.
Thank you. And it's great to have Sarah on as well. In particular, and not just because she's highly respected in the field, but she did lead a really interesting piece that European Urology posted in response to this particular letter. And we really want to focus on that quite a bit in the letter.
Yeah, I think that letter is important because, again, now that this discussion's come back into light, it's important to know how to move forward, what educational points to take from this and how do we improve the situation.
Yeah, and so before we get to that, which we want to devote most of our program to today, Nathan, I suppose we did want to invite Neil just to give some reaction to it. Now, we've already made it clear we're not going through this whole letter in detail. We don't want to go through it line by line. We really want to focus on the reaction to it, which includes the reaction in Neil's department and the way forward in particular with this. But shall we invite Neil to talk to us a bit about it?
Yeah, well, obviously I did my fellowship in Toronto for 2 years, and Renew spent time in Toronto as well. So we do have a lot of connections back with Toronto. So Neil, what's your feeling? What's the mood? What's the take-home message?
It's been a tough week, to say the least. And on the other hand, even though it's been a tough week, it's actually as a leader of this urological unit, as I think we all agree, it's as why we're here today. It's an opportunity for us to talk about the issue. I just want to say that this were words by one of the attendings in a staff of 30 attending urologists, one of the largest academic groups in the world. And it only represents that, the view of one individual. And it in no way represents the view of our university, and in no way represents the view of our affiliated hospitals, and in no way represents the view of myself, as I've written already. But what is disheartening is we've done a lot of work around improving, our recruitment of female urology residents. They probably represent now about 40% of our residents over the last number of years. We're accelerating our hiring of attendings. And, I think what hurts a little bit is when you see in Twitter some individuals saying that, because of this letter that represents, again, one of 29 attendings, somehow females should not apply to our program or apply for jobs at our program. And I just want to say that for me, that's quite hurtful and really is not the way we practice, operate, or work at the University of Toronto. So we as part of our last strategic plan, we actually had it there as one of our pillars. And I also just want to say that we're very committed to really drawing on the entire pool of human capital. Would be absolutely ridiculous to limit our collective, staff to a certain segment of the population. It's not what we're about, especially in an amazingly diverse city and tolerant, open country like Canada. So that's my 2 words on it.
Well said, Neil. I mean, I think that Nathan, even during my fellowship time at U of T, we've always sensed that it is a place that values diversity and inclusion, and I've always felt that way. So I think that's why partly this letter came as a bit of a shock, because we all know the situation to be different.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, so it's as simple as that. And as I said, we didn't want to dwell on the nuts and bones of it too much, but your statement brings great clarity to your own position personally, which none of us are surprised about, Neil, and to that of your department, which I know many of your colleagues, including your non-urology colleagues looking at reaction, felt strongly about. But we did want to move on, and let's now have a chat with Sarah about her article that she wrote, and we'll put all the links to these position statements and articles in the piece. But Sarah, before the letter was published, I think, or was it before the letter was published? This piece was already drafted, wasn't it? So why don't you talk us? It was published. Yeah, super. Shoot.
Right. So Dr. Cato, when Dr. Cato was the editor for the Manels paper, for your paper, which we all had a chance to review, and he actually brought it to myself as an opportunity to write an editorial, and he, as I think many of you know, Jim is incredibly supportive of and a strong advocate for efforts towards DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and has been incredibly supportive of sort of advancing that initiative. So he had asked me to take a look at the article and then to draft a response. And I read the article with great interest. As you know, this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. I've spent a lot of time trying to think about ways that we can continue to advance to expand our field and expand opportunities for everyone in urology. And I brought the letter back to the editorial board, and we basically decided that we would write a letter ourselves instead of me searching out additional authors. And so I had drafted the statement that you see, including an official stance by our editorial board with respect to our commitment to avoiding exclusive panels and forging forward towards expanding opportunities for equity and inclusion in academic discourse, which is our primary opportunity as editors at European Urology, but also as people who are in positions where we are lucky enough to have the opportunity to speak at meetings. And that was one of the reasons why one of the things I did was I sat down and looked through a number of different protocols and handbooks that have been developed by leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion work to think about putting forward concrete solutions that we can use, concrete sort of tactics that we can take as a field to enact real durable culture change and to counteract some of these attitudes that are certainly less pervasive than they used to be, but unfortunately still exist. And so we wrote that letter as a team, including our statement on our stance regarding exclusive panels and really working to advance inclusive panels. We put in key strategic opportunities where we as a field can advance DEI work. And I included even a speaker rider that can be used just to help people sort of find the language, because these are actually hard things to talk about, but when given an opportunity to speak, that's a key opportunity for people in our field to actually enact change and ask, is the panel diverse? Is it not? Who else is going to be on it? I'd like to participate, but I'd like to participate if it's an equitable opportunity for all. Because I think one of the things that this letter brought up is that we do want to be very clear that this is not about tokenism, or I certainly don't want to be given an opportunity because I'm a woman. I have no interest in that.
Yeah.
I've worked very hard to learn the things that I have learned and to be able to operate the way that I do and to do the research that I do. And I appreciate every opportunity to share that. But I want to make sure that everyone who has worked hard to learn and to be a clinician and to be a surgeon and to be a researcher has the opportunity to have their voice heard equally. And it's not about merit. It's not necessarily all about merit. It's about ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to have their voice heard equally, which means that we need to expand our pool and allow and foster cognitive diversity. That's only going to push our field forward. So anyhow, so that was where that was the impetus behind the editorial that we wrote that actually was published alongside the original paper. And if we look for silver linings, one positive that may come out of the events of the last week, which have been really hard and hurtful for many of us, is it gives us another opportunity to talk about the concrete positive steps forward. And we appreciate the opportunity to talk about this here, both I'm sure Neil and I do. These are key initiatives that we should all be working towards. So we can talk about the positive things and talk about the concrete steps, and I think focus on working on this together and avoiding either exclusive practices or creating a sort of an us versus them narrative, which is not productive in any way, shape, or form.
Well said.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the guts of it, isn't it? Because, and like you said, Sarah, you know, a lot of institutions have now taken official vocal commitments towards improving diversity. You know, we know that AUA, European Urology, Lancet, around the time of your publication, you know, they committed towards, you know, non-exclusive panels and not participating in Manels, and the same with the commitment that European Urology have also made, and that was in your editorial.
Yeah.
Should we read it out, Declan?
Yeah, there's a beautiful, we'll put all the links in here, but there's a lovely box you put at the end where you literally, just in a couple of sentences, read out the position, the European Urology commitment, I suppose. So we thought we might just read it out for emphasis.
Yeah, so here it is. The Editorial Board of European Urology is committed to inclusive panels at academic meetings. As such, we will advocate for inclusive panels in which we participate, will not serve as panelists at public conferences or events that systematically exclude women or participants from diverse backgrounds, and will advocate for increased diversity and inclusion on speaker rosters. It's a strong commitment to make.
Yeah, it is. And of course, it does include other diversity things. So some people have, in some of the comments earlier, said, well, what about white-only panels and all this sort of stuff as well? Clearly very, very important. But I suppose because the women thing is 50% of the whole population, it is the biggest focus. But one of the other things that I really appreciated about our discussions on this and that statement is it includes all diversity. As you said beautifully, Sarah, all voices, hearing all voices. It's not just about men, women. It's not just about white and others. This statement applies to just diversity, and I think that's really important as well.
And one other thing I really liked about your editorial, Sarah, was your quote that you included at the start, and that highlights that this is not just an issue in medicine or urology. It exists across all elements of sciences and technology. And I think it was the vice president of IBM that said, smart teams will do amazing things, but truly diverse teams will do impossible things. And it really highlights the value of diversity going forward.
Neil, I also, maybe I could just add in there, I think this concept of just allowing our current talent to bubble up organically is kind of flawed. And I think the reason for that is very simple. You know, there's no doubt that urology has been a bit late for female residents. It was historically seen as a male specialty, maybe like gynecology is today, which is predominantly female. But I think we could learn from other professions. Law is one that I think is a great example where for many years now, probably a generation, the majority of the law classes have been still female. Yet when you look at, partners of law firms, senior lawyers, it's still disproportionately male. So this concept of the bubble up organic concept, I'm not sure it holds water, no pun intended, as we're talking about urology, but I think we don't want to waste a generation proving that it may work or not. I think we just have to act and make sure that it happens. And I think that's important.
I couldn't agree more. I think, it took me some time to find the right words to respond to the letter. But as I was thinking about it, I think one thing that does come up is this sort of expectation, just wait until there's enough women and then eventually it'll happen. But we know that that's not true, because we know that promotions in academia are not, women are promoted at lower rates. There are multiple recent, really brilliant and well-written and well-researched studies that clearly document issues around promotions, around opportunities in leadership, around opportunities in publication. So we're not just talking about a voice at the podium, a time at the mic. We're also talking about, when you're at the mic, are you just a moderator, or are you someone who's actually being asked your opinion? Are you being offered the opportunity to write an editorial? And these are key metrics. The reason this actually matters is because in academia, all of these opportunities, being an editor, being on an editorial board, writing an editorial, are key parts of developing international and national reputation, which are actually metrics that are used for promotion in academia. And that's important for everything from how much people are paid to advancing further opportunities. And again, this is about building a pipeline. And one thing that I think image or sort of, theme that I think about a lot is widening the path and making it a little bit easier for a lot more people to walk down it. and not having it be something that's a pretty narrow path that only certain folks are going to get to the edge, get it to the head of. Again, when we do things together, we go faster, we do better, and we solve more problems. And it's important to make sure that all the people that are working hard to gain that level of expertise or you can share it. Otherwise, we're just squandering all that experience, all that training, all that work. So I think, yeah.
I think that's where this meritocracy argument is flawed. It's because, if we wait until, if the argument is, I'll wait until women achieve the same kind of academic equivalency as men, and then they'll be asked to go, to be speakers at conferences. The problem is there is systematic bias at every single level that like Sarah said, that path is very hard to walk. So that's where that meritocracy argument is completely flawed.
Nathan, sorry.
Well, I think if I may, you made a key point in your paper, which is that when you have a woman who is a chair of a session, you're more likely to have more women on it. So for better or worse, implicit bias is powerful and pervasive. When we're on planning committees, we think about who we know. We think about whose paper we read recently. We think about who we heard speak last year. And those people are sort of they're going to be more at the front of the mind of the folks who are planning. So I think that's where having these, for example, speaker bureaus, where we can look and see, okay, who is publishing on BCG unresponsive bladder cancer? Who is publishing on metastatic kidney cancer right now in the microbiome? Instead of just sort of bringing forth the folks who have had these opportunities or the people, again, it's all about sponsorship, right? So one thing that's really wonderful that we can all do is we know our trainees who may not have had an opportunity or our colleagues who may not have had an opportunity to speak about something that they're really experts in. And instead of pegging the person who has had an opportunity to talk, there's probably untapped potential that we can harness and bring another voice into the conversation and more perspective. So again, it's about, as Neil so thoughtfully said at the very beginning, it's using all of human capital here. We have a big field with a lot of experts. It's important that that everyone has the opportunity to actually have their voices heard.
So,
and I think the ultimate product, at the end of the day, which is how we look after our patients, how we create new knowledge, innovate and teach, will be better for it. I mean, it's impossible that it wouldn't be, just because of its sheer math, right? So I strongly endorse this. And you know what? In some ways, maybe it is a blessing that this happened this week, because it really does represent an opportunity for all of us to maybe have a deeper conversation. I can tell you, I now have a topic for my staff retreat, faculty retreat this year. And so I think it's, maybe in some ways, it is a blessing in disguise.
I actually think the same thing. I think we had a good push on this when we published the original piece, but this has actually totally galvanized it. And actually, in the last few minutes, what we want to talk about are the practical steps forward as well, especially with Neil and Nathan for a few minutes as heads of department and people who convene a lot of meetings as well. So as Sarah touched on there, one of the topics and one of the things that came up after we published the panel was a relatively young US-based male urologist put out a thing saying, look, it's tricky. Have you any tips for how we would, if you get an invitation to speak at a meeting, it might be a good opportunity. You don't get a lot of them. You're building your career. How do you gently open the can to say, could I be stuck on a Manel? And that's one of the nice pieces about this paper is I think it will give us some language that will make conference organizers understand that someone's pushed back the European Urology piece and it's okay to ask. But it is a practical thing about conferences, Nathan. And so I want to ask your opinion on practical steps societies and conferences can take to actually put these things into practice, like this year and next year. People who are out there listening who are planning next year's meetings, come on, because you've done this a couple of times now, convening the USAN's annual scientific meeting where you took an extremely proactive view on how you built that diversity.
Absolutely. And I think it's there's the two challenges here. It's often the same people get tapped on the shoulder because they know that the people tapping on the shoulder know that they'll step forward. But the people tapping on the shoulder need to know who they're tapping on the shoulder, if that kind of makes sense. And I know, for example, Neil organised a lot of meetings and all of us have been involved. But take, for example, I remember being at on the scientific committee looking for speakers for our meeting in Australia. And of course, you know me, I'm always got my eyes out. And I remember being at the SUO meeting in, I can't remember where it was, somewhere in the US. Anyway, Donna Hansel got up to give this talk and she was absolutely brilliant. And I think before she'd got off the podium, I'd found her email address just through the internet, and I'd already invited her. I said, would you love to come to Australia? Now, 20 minutes later, she said, I'm in a taxi on my way to the airport. I'd love to. And that was it. You know, the fact is you have to consciously be in the time and space and actually make the effort. When you're the convener, it's on your shoulders. So I think there are little things like that. It's literally you see or hear someone who's good. It doesn't matter who they are. Get in touch with them straight away. And we can do that with the internet these days. It's amazing. So, and she, as you know, she came out and was the superstar of our meeting. I mean, she would have won the Golden Globe, the Academy Award. I mean, she was the star of the show. So I think it is incumbent upon us to actually not just go to meetings and shake hands with people we know and whatever. It's also to listen and say, hey, they're young or whatever, haven't heard them before, but gee, they're fantastic. And you've actually got to write it down and have them on your list, and then you know, they get that opportunity, they're heard again and again, and that's how these things snowball. So I think we've got to be careful we don't sort of just keep going back to the same cave, retreating with the same things. We've got to step out, go across to a different part of the world. And I think that's the challenge is if you're going to do that, that's great, but you need help to do that. And, you know, Renu and I even talked at one point about creating an international speakers bureau, remember? I said, it's so frustrating because you look at all these meetings and you say, I want to get someone to talk, as you mentioned before, so about, say, bladder cancer or something. You want to get someone good as well, and not all speakers are good. Let me tell you, we've sat through pretty bad meetings, but you almost want to try even too hard to get someone who's even better than average. But I think it starts with the person tapping the person on the shoulder needs to know that the person they're tapping is across these issues. That is the first thing by a mile, because if they're not across these issues, they're tapping the wrong person on the shoulder. Yeah. And, Declan and I have had the experience. A great example, we set up a Women in Urology breakfast at a meeting, and fortunately it's gone forward, but we were shocked that, a year or two later it had disappeared off the whole landscape, and we're saying, what happened here? This meeting had a real head of steam. We had a sponsor.
Standing room only.
It was standing room. And you think, what on earth is going on here? People sort of, I don't know. It's just it's bizarre that this can still happen. So I think it does require a conscious effort. But on a positive note, and I'll hear Neil. I'll just say one thing which is really positive. I was tapped on the shoulder by one of my fellows who I did an SUO fellowship with Neil in Toronto, Alex Cahoon. She invited me to be on a panel and to talk at BAUS this year. So I think there are great examples there that, through these sort of fellowship programs where there is, a whole range of people, there I am 10 years on from my fellowship getting tapped on the shoulder by Alex Cahoon, and she was, in charge of that section of BAUS. So I think, the worm can turn, as we say, and every year I get, invites to various things from our fellowship group. The number of, great females and other diverse people is growing and growing. So I think we ought to not be too negative in a way, because there are positives, but I think we need to be just conscious of how to give things a nudge in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also, Nathan, is, one of the excuses we hear is that, I asked this fantastic woman to be a speaker, but she was unavailable, so we're back to a Manel. But the thing is, that tap on the shoulder could be, can you suggest someone good that you know of? And
also, that whole model, though, does rely a little bit on individuals like Nathan or Neil or me, people who've been strong track record in promoting women in these conferences. But we've talked about this on the podcast before. I think the major scientific organizations should have it on their agenda item when they're planning. They've got professional conference organizers and the president of your organization. But, on the annual Congress planning 2 years out, item 6, gender diversity and race diversity, etc. And it's on the agenda so that, the new convener.
I was going to say it should almost be, an item on a checkbox, right? When you're putting your meetings together, I think it as a reminder, you should just have, are we fulfilling an EDI, DIE, DEI mandate? It's got different acronyms, but it's the same 3 letters. I also think I just take a step back, it's not obviously about meetings, right? Every search committee at the university has a representative. Every division and department has a EDI representative at our institution. In university. So I think I think that helps, obviously, as well. So we want to make sure that this is not just at the end of the day just about conferences, right? It's about facilitating careers.
And one of the things that's key about in doing all of this again is tracking, right? So we actually want to have the data to say, well, did we do a good job in being representative in fostering diversity and making sure that we tapped people who come from various backgrounds and various perspectives? Did we hear those all? And so that was actually in the table that we put into our editorial. That was one of the key points was, we have to just understand what the numbers are, because it's just all about, again, awareness. And there are really, as I mentioned, great speakers bureaus that can be used through either the Society of Women in Urology, or we started the Women in Urologic Oncology, and we have a dedicated registry of all of our members and all of the things that they're experts in, and that they like to give talks on, because that's important too. So that there's plenty of opportunities. And I certainly know, like, whenever somebody asks me to give a talk, and if I can't make it, I say, hey, there's this really fabulous person, and I'd love for you to extend the invitation to them. They would do a great job. So sponsorship is another big part of this, right? If you can't do it, you bring along somebody else, and give that opportunity, and sort of keep again promoting all these other really great people who need a chance to be heard.
One of the teachings I have from this is I still, despite have been very vocal on this for a few years, like Nathan, get caught on Manels. I was caught on one already this year. And it's because when you get invited to do a lot of talks, and I'll say especially here in the Asia Pacific region, where we have a complete lack of diversity up in many of our Asian neighbours, and which many are addressing, but the fact is it's a much bigger issue in some of our Asia Pacific and neighbouring countries here. And you get invited, you say, thanks, I'll do this talk, I'll do that talk. You forget about it, you lock it in, and then you turn up, on the day and look at the programme and realise I'm caught on a Manel.
Or the panels change over time.
Yeah, or they change, because very often when you get invited, you don't see the panel. However, that's one of the things I really like, Sarah, about this pivoting towards, actually, it's okay to put in this thing. And when I've been invited onto a Manel before, and I think we've tweeted about this, I have replied to say, I'm terribly sorry, I can't accept this invitation because of this. But I think, that requires having some confidence, and I think, that's what the others were saying, as I mentioned on Twitter, that it's not actually that easy to do that. But one of the really nice things about this piece is it will give people a little bit of language, a bit of support to be able to say, thanks so much for the invitation. And by the way, I strongly endorse this position from European Urology, blah, blah, blah. Could you please kindly, address this for me? So I think you can inadvertently be caught on Manels. Neil, I'm sure you've been caught on a Manel yourself before. We all have, Nathan, haven't we? But, I think that this language will help people feel that, in accepting a talk, it's totally acceptable to actually put in this bit from European Urology.
Yeah, I mean, not only is it totally acceptable, now that this issue has come into light so much, it's almost kind of, it's not desirable to have a picture of you on a Manel on social media. You'll be hashtagged for sure. But that's right. I mean, it's such an inadvertent subconscious bias, but it takes a real conscious effort to overcome it. Sarah, one thing I wanted to bring up with you was, I mean, there's been a little bit of criticism on social media. Should this article ever even have been published? The letter. The letter. Yeah. Yeah. And we were keen to hear your take on it.
I think that has been definitely, there's been a lot of discussion around that. And I'll tell you, the first time I read the letter was a week ago, Thursday, on social media. I didn't know it was going to be published. But I think that this is an opportunity. And I think that Neil said it well earlier. The reason that the decision to publish it came from the journal, from the managing editor of the Manels paper. The way that these letters come in is we received many, many, many of them. And usually the editor, who was the editor for that paper, vets any letters to the editor. We make sure that the authors have an opportunity to respond as Declan and Dr. Teo and Dr. Rabella did, and in their really appropriate and excellently written response. And then it's an opportunity to share a view. Now, that letter does not represent the views of the journal. I think one thing that was challenging about this was that it sort of just dropped. And I think that there were a lot of comments about the fact that it was a really hard letter for people to read. I've shared we were talking before this panel today, we talked about the fact that, it was hard for me to read. It certainly, I think some people said it was triggering, and I think that's true. It's hard to have these kinds of views put into black and white, especially when they're the kinds of views that many of us are working very hard to move away from. Should it have been published? It gets into a pretty challenging debate around freedom of speech, but I think that we can take this as something that is positive. These views do not represent the views of the University of Toronto. They do not represent the views of European Urology. They are out there, however, and we need to acknowledge them, and we need to do what we're doing right now, which is grapple with these issues and then think about how we're going to actually move forward. Again, we cannot wait for the status quo to change. We must change it. We only can change it if we know what the status quo actually is. And one of the issues in the world right now, and especially with social media and everything else, is that some views are held and are sort of bounced around in echo chambers that don't necessarily make it over, even though people who are in separate echo chambers feel the ramifications of those views. We have an opportunity to look at these words and look at these sentiments and grapple and have a tough conversation. And thank you for hosting a tough conversation today where we can actually respond and say, okay, again,
I wanted to echo that.
Most of us knew this. We knew these views were out there, but now we can, let's take this as an opportunity to hear them, respectfully acknowledge and disagree, and then move forward. And sorry, Neil, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I thank you. Well said. I just wanted to again thank you, Renu, Declan, and Nathan for giving us a platform to share our thoughts about this as well. So this helps, both alleviate some of the grief, but also open the conversation in a productive way going forward. So I thank you guys for that.
Yeah, well,
using the term guys generically, of course.
Yeah, look, thank you, and I've really enjoyed this. Listening to this conversation for the last 30 minutes, I think it really does give us the positives to go forward. I do think the journal handled this brilliantly. First of all, by publishing this paper. Second, by commissioning this fabulous piece. Plus, there's another piece we haven't really talked about, but leaders from EAU and AUA also wrote a piece in support of this. All being done, regardless of the letter which came in separately. And I do agree with you, Sarah, and Jim Cato, revered friend and editor-in-chief of the journal, has also been responding very, very proactively, sensibly on social media to all of this, pointing us towards it. So I think this has given us the way forward, would you say? Nathan, final thoughts from you on the whole thing, on the way forward?
Oh, look, it starts with little things, isn't it? Inviting a diverse range of reviewers for an article, co-publishing with people and pushing people forward who want to be pushed forward, and giving them that opportunity. So for me, it's all about opportunity. Opportunity will then help rebalance the situation, I think. Yeah,
totally right. Well, there you go, Renu.
I feel better now.
Do you feel better? Good. We're still in lockdown, but you have cheered us up today by giving us a positive way forward. Neil and Sarah, lovely to have you on. Please, we should get these folk back again. They're just fantastic.
Yes, so good.
And we don't have to be talking about this topic all the time, because we know you're both fantastic urologists who will want to come on and talk about all sorts of other stuff as well. What about that guitar in the background behind Neil Fleshner? Is that one of those Zoom? Is that one of those Zoom props, or does he actually play the guitar? People have things behind them, so people judge them, but does he play the guitar?
I have seen him strum occasionally.
I love the way he's sharing his Zoom screen with his guitar, though. That is quite impressive.
Very Neil Fleshner. Yeah, exactly. And Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. That's all.
Great to have you, Nathan.
Yeah, of course, Nathan Lawrentschuk.
Come back soon.
Friend of the podcast, back again. Thanks
very much. See
you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. We'll put some useful links in the podcast for those who want to read a bit more on this topic. And we're posting again on YouTube. This seems to be very popular. People like seeing a bit of video as well, interestingly. We get a lot of positive feedback about that. If you have other topics you would like us to speak about, as ever, please shout out. But in the meantime, that's all from myself, Renu and Nathan here in the studio, and Sarah and Neil on Zoom. Thank you.